So lastly, we have our students who are considered gifted and talented. In California, they refer to these students as being a part of the GATE program, and GATE stands for Gifted and Talented Education. So are those two terms synonymous or are they different? So if a person is considered gifted, it often refers to an exceptional intelligence or academic ability. Um, it just means that they particularly excel at it and they excel above and beyond what their peers, not only can the knowledge they can acquire, but also the knowledge that they can conceptualize and then use and apply. So their thinking is beyond just critical thinking. Their thinking is just out there, but it's great, and so this program exists because not only are they surpassing their peers, but their ability to acquire information and apply it is beyond what they're going to be able to get in their standard education classroom, the standard general education classroom, which leads to these students being tested using the IQ test in most cases, and then moving on into the gifted program. If you remember during week 2, I believe, we talked about different lawsuits, and out here in California we had the Larry P. Rouse versus State of California, where basically it ended up where African American children to this day will not be tested by using the IQ for the gifted and talented program, because it was being used inappropriately to put that particular population into special education. The court ruled that the test was unfair, and as a result said that no African American children to this day will be tested by the state using an IQ test to determine not only special education services that lead to special education classroom and what most of this course has talked about, but it also excludes them from being able to get into the GATE program. How does one get around that? If they are an African American family, they have to pay for it out of pocket. So they have to go a lot more above and beyond to be able to get the same things that non-African Americans can get. So then we have talent. So giftedness, think of higher critical thinking, acquiring knowledge and being able to apply it above and beyond, their peers. But then you have those who are considered talented, and this is someone who is either has exceptional artistic or athletic ability. And it's often considered innate, meaning they're born with it. Could be the case, but it also could be that they are just really dedicated to learning that craft. I don't watch basketball to be able to say this person got this many points this season, but I know when it comes to watching Steph Curry, it's like, I'm pretty sure he's talented and he's gifted at being able to shoot his 3-pointers, but I'm pretty sure he just didn't all of a sudden one day and decide, okay, next week I'm going to be, this master at being able to shoot 3-pointers. And it comes with practice and everything else and perseverance. Kobe Bryant even talks about, how you have to be able to get in there and put the work in to be and excel at the level that he was at, well as Michael Jordan. So when you have these people who end up, going above and beyond the standard person, yes, they have that talent, but they also focused on it and, and grew it. You have the federal definition of those who are considered gifted, and those are the ones who give evidence of high performance capability in areas such as intellectual, creative, artistic, leadership capacity, or certain academic fields. I tend, at least in my experience, tended to see the gifted children that I interacted with in Florida really excel above their peers in math and science, which are great because if you're going into the STEM, you're going into a STEM career, then it will bode really, really well for them. And for those who aren't familiar, because I know we throw around a lot of acronyms in this course, STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. So when it comes to being gifted, it allows for gifted traits and gifted behaviors, which goes back into, being able to perform intellectually above and beyond what their peers are doing. It connects the definition with the need to provide special education programs for children identified as gifted. And so, once again, they may call it different things at different schools, but the overarching umbrella is the GATE program. Here, Howard Gardner's concept of multiple intelligences talks about the different areas that they go about looking at when students are being considered for a GATE program, for a gifted program. Yes, they look at the scores, but they're also looking at how intelligent. And I say that, and I can feel like some people are probably like, what do you mean, how intelligent? But when it comes to their linguistics, how well do they communicate? Are they exceptionally gifted in that area? Is it the logical mathematic things? There's certain people you can throw out ridiculous equations and they can just like think about it and then boom, they have the answer, or it could be something as simple as, what's 44 times 65, and then just blah, 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 and they just give you the answer. Whereas I would say the majority of us are looking for a calculator, or we're shrugging and saying, why do I even need to know this? But some people just have it in their brains. They're able to compute. Their mental math skills are just off the chart, and they're able to not only compute, but also be able to apply that end result to whatever it is they're working on. Some individuals are musically talented and gifted, and they can hear it once and be able to repeat it right there on the piano, the guitar, whatever it is that they have at hand. There's spatial, there's bodily kinesthetic, there's interpersonal, intrapersonal. So they're looking at the whole student. You can't just walk in and be like, well, yeah, I'm really good with math. Like, what other areas are you also excelling in? Students of color and those with disabilities continue to be underrepresented in GATE programs. It doesn't mean that they're not there, or it doesn't mean that someone is telling them they can't take part. It's just that, as we know in California, there's a hurdle right there with the court case. So if a parent happens to be African American and they want their child tested, now they have to go and pay out of pocket for the testing. It is not normally covered by insurance because it's not something that's negatively impacting their health. They're looking for something to help them basically continue to function at a higher level. But then from there, you're looking at resources and making sure that they can stay in the GATE program, take part in the resources that are, the different things, the activities that are taking place with the class. In other GATE programs in other states, they tend to do more cultural events. So, do they have access to transportation to get there? Do they have money to pay for the summer camp that's going to focus just on, like in this case, playing the cello so that they can continue to excel among their peers? It's all the things, so it's more than just getting tested and getting into the program. It's being able to continue to access the resources that the students are accessing as well. So when it comes to placement, they could very well be in the general education classroom. They may be in clusters, in different clusters based off of ability, depending on the school, depending on the teacher. Differentiated instruction and works as well. If you have a gifted student in your class and you're teaching, I always throw the example of photosynthesis out there because it's something that we all hear about elementary, middle school, and high school. But if you've got someone in your class who, is third grade and you're teaching photosynthesis, you're going to want to be able to approach it in a way that continues to challenge their thinking and causes them to also grow in their thinking as well. Because they may be able to get up there and recite it, backwards and forwards just fine. But you want to make sure they're getting something out of the education experience as well, something out of the lesson. In some cases, they may go to a resource room. That resource room may be where the other gifted children are, and so they may be working on a particular project. When I taught in Florida back in the late 2000s, those particular students were working on a computer program that was going to help the front office with tracking. I'm not really sure what, but it may have been donations for their carnival or something. But it was a basically, nowadays we have constant contact and we have, different ways of sending out mail merges. But back then they didn't, at least they weren't readily available like they are now. So the gifted class was working on a software program, or type of program, I should say, that was going to help the receptionists be able to not only keep all the information nice and tight in their Excel spreadsheet, but also make it easier for them for sending out, donation letters, thank you letters, X, Y, and Z. I mean, that's not something that the general education students would get to do, but the gifted students were not having access to not only computer programming, but being a part of creating something that was going to be put into use. So, for those who are really interested in computer programming, it was a great experience. And who knows, they may have gone on to continue to study computer programming and may be computer programmers now. But it was the access to the ability to be able to do it is what encouraged the development of that particular skill. In some cases, depending on the school, the gifted student may spend the entire day with that gifted population. So instead of being with the general education classroom and then going out for an hour or so every week or every day, they spend the entire day with their cohort of other gifted students. And there are special schools out there that are just for students who are gifted or talented. There are magnet schools, which I don't hear about too much in California, but in the South, where I'm from, there are magnet schools. I did attend a high school that was magnet in New Orleans, simply because the New Orleans school system is so low performing. I wanted to say another word. I want to just call it horrible, but that wouldn't be nice. But yeah, back then they had magnet schools, and they would sometimes refer to it as a college preparatory school as well. And basically everything that you're doing is functioning at a higher level. You are acquiring information at a higher level. Your expectation of performance is higher, and it's all the things that are hopefully matching you up to be able to handle the rigor of college. There's state-sponsored residential schools as well. Think of them as maybe possibly boarding schools. In that case, they wouldn't be state-sponsored, but they would definitely be sponsored, usually privately funded. But these are, once again, schools that are just for, maybe science and technology. And in some cases, they're linked to a university. And so that way it feeds the university, and whatever's being focused on in the high school might be feeding, say, for instance, their science and technology program at their university. So it's kind of a reciprocal effect, like, okay, we're giving money to this high school, we're giving all this funding to help increase their state fund, their science and technology program. In turn, we want the brightest there, we want the most talented, we want the gifted ones there, put them in there. Now they're going to come to our school. They try to retain them in some cases to teach or give back in some kind of way. And so the cycle continues. There's also the Visual and Performing Arts Academies. New Orleans has a great one called NOCA, which is a great place for students to expend that creative knowledge and, the thought and everything else. And they're surrounded by other individuals who share the same passion. So they're still getting their basic education, still working towards, that standard high school diploma to go on and do whatever their next goal is education-wise, but they're able to really focus on, it could be their acting skills or their music skills, or, whether it be vocal or playing an instrument, whatever it is, they're able to focus on it there. What used to be great is that it used to be visual and performing arts programs in most school system. They had the money to do it, but nowadays it seems like everything keeps getting pared down to where we've ended up with academies that focus just on the visual and performing arts, which automatically knocks out that ability for majority of students to get into or even have access to, regardless of their ability level. Excuse me. So curriculum modifications for gifted students in the general education classroom include curriculum telescoping, zeroing in on that one skill and then just becoming hyper focused on it and breaking it down to maybe even its molecular level or the granular level, and then building it back up. So you're looking at something extremely close and finite. So if to go back to the photosynthesis example, instead of looking at the entire process, you may go back and just look at, well, let's look at the water quality and how that could affect the photosynthesis process. And so now you're going in, you're looking at the water quality, and you're like, okay, let's take it a step further, because now we know there could be lead in the water, there could be contaminants, there could be all the things from pollution. Okay, let's actually go, maybe to a water treatment facility, or let's actually go to the ocean if you're out here in San Diego like we are, and let's actually pull a sample. Let's go ahead and run a sample. Let's go over and go over to the water treatment facility and get it tested. And now let's look at what contaminants are there and how that's impacting the environment. So that's one example of how a teacher could approach a particular lesson if they have a gifted student. So if you happen to have a gifted student in your classroom and it's in a general education classroom, maybe you could have Johnny, who now has leaped from being the student who had all the disabilities throughout this course to now being a gifted and talented. And for those who are just jumping in and hearing this the first time, Johnny is just the example I give. Johnny is not a real person, but maybe Johnny is now in the gifted program and he has been given the task of, okay, we have this water sample and we know what contaminants are there. Johnny, can you please explain how these contaminants in the water can affect the photosynthesis process? How can it affect, the trees, the plants around the ocean, around the river, the lake, the water. And so this is an opportunity for that student to really dive deep into a topic versus saying there's water pollution that impacts, the photosynthesis process and the people and plants around the area. There's content area acceleration. This is the particular one that I have seen the most. So basically, if you think it's going to take, as a teacher, if you may think it's going to take 2 weeks to teach the lesson of photosynthesis, if you have Johnny's group, his group, because they acquire information faster than their standard, their general education classmates, they may be able to get through it in a week. They may be able to get through it in a couple of days. And so in those cases, sometimes teachers will give them a test to basically test out of that lesson. And this is not something that is mandatory, but it might be an option. And so while you as the teacher are teaching the rest of the class all about photosynthesis, Johnny's group may have gone on, and like I said, they may be now working on just the water sample, and you may have given them the report and saying, okay, I know you guys you understand photosynthesis, you're good to go. Here are some, different case studies that I found. Can you please, I want you to create a presentation to present to the class about water pollution. So once again, you're allowing them to grow educationally and understand the content more, but they've accelerated beyond their peers. And you're still keeping them engaged while you continue to teach the other students, the general approach to photosynthesis, or teaching it at least. And then you have independent study and self-directed learning. When I was in high school, I was in, I want to say Spanish 4. I tested into Spanish 4. Spanish 4 was not an option, so they had me in independent study, and I spent that semester reading novellas and basically coming up with my own way of staying engaged. But I was in a Spanish 2 class. Was not gifted, but it was an option that was given to me. Cluster grouping, once again, being intentional as the teacher, putting students together so that all their needs could be met. Once again, if you have, back to the example of Johnny, going back and looking at a case study with the water pollution or the contaminants in the water, you may have that whole group work on it together. They're still engaged in the process, they're still learning, and it works. Excuse me. There's also cooperative learning, working with others to come up with information. There's creative and higher level thinking, which I've talked about. And with the creative piece, sometimes it's great, depending on the teacher, because sometimes teachers just want them to stick to what works for them as a teacher versus, what really works for the student. Sometimes teachers have allowed students to determine how they want to express mastery of the content. So a teacher may say, okay, I can give you this multiple choice test, but if you feel like you have a better way of proving to me you have mastered the content, I'm open to your suggestions. So sometimes students in the gifted program will turn around and say, well, I would like to create a video, or I want to do a, collage or whatever it is. They're allowed to lean into that creative side to express themselves, whereas in the general education classroom or the self-contained special education classroom, there's going to be certain things probably in place, like, no, you're taking this multiple choice test, or no, you need to, make sure you speak into your device to be able to, explain your answer to number 4, things of that nature. And then there's problem-based learning. Basically, you're presented with a problem, and now you're going to solve it. Like I talked about the group in Florida in the gifted program, they were tasked with figuring out a way for the receptionist to keep track of all the donations coming in for the carnival. So instead of all this paper, they wanted to do everything electronically. And so they were given that task of what would be the best way to approach this. And they were given, a list of all the donations and the monies and how to go about everything. And from that, by the end of that, that second quarter, they had a system in place that helped the receptionist be more effective and, make sure no one was missed out when it came to thank you cards and things of that nature. So there's ways to engage all students, whether they are individuals with disabilities that impact their learning, and then you may have to take a little bit longer to explain a process, or use devices or different types of modifications to print material. But then there's the other side where the students excel above and beyond their peers, and then you're going to need to be able to think of creative ways, once again, out of the box again, so that they can continue to be challenged and their needs can be met, because both sides, regardless of what end of that spectrum they're on, and of course those in the middle who are the general education classrooms, all deserve a quality education. And that includes, that concludes the GATE program.